welcome back to PHL Cup. I'm your host Manny, and today we have someone that's actually shaped most of the processes that I go through and my opinions on this industry. So we've got Curtis Clay on today. Hi, Kurt. How are we doing?
I'm good, man. I'm good. Just, living. It's a little chilly here, but it's
Nice.
good. Yeah.
It's Seattle. I've been told that it's kind of like Scottish weather, which I can kind of agree. Although when I was there, the summer was really hot, and it was like one of the
Yeah.
hottest ones you've had. And I was like,
Yeah.
I think I'm getting lied to. um, but I do, and we've kind of done a podcast off air just now. But I do want to say that I owe a lot of my thought processes and just how I view this industry and
Mm,
speaking to people based on the interaction that we had when I was at your gym. I do understand that it was very briefly, but
right,
the
right,
openness and the
right.
communication, just the in depth of conversation that we got into, like within the first couple seconds of speaking, was like something that I've never had, and it kind of
Mm,
like we were kind of going back and forward with me, you and Ryan, and it was something that has really genuinely shaped how I've now progressed through this industry.
I love
Um,
it.
I obviously know who you are and what you do, but if you just introduce yourself, let us know who you
Yeah.
are, what you do, and how you got to where you are. Have you ever wondered how I'm able to run my business, my podcast, and still be able to coach? Well, I use TeamBuildr. TeamBuildr is an all in one coaching software that reduces the amount of time that we spend on the back end of programming, on our Google Sheets, on our Excels, and allows me more freedom to do testing. With this podcast and episodes, I'm actually able to run some programs that I learned through different coaches coming on. To find out how you can use TeamBuildr and how it can apply to your own program, visit the link in the description and catch yourself a 30-day free trial. Just simply use code PACHALKUP, that's PACHALQUP, and start the next stage of your coaching career.
Yeah, for sure. So my name is Curtis Van Wyck. It's not Curtis Clay, but it's Curtis Van Wyck, and I'm the owner of Curtis Clay Training. We're in a little bit outside Seattle. I'd say 20, 30 minutes north of downtown Seattle. And yeah, I just do training. So essentially, the goal is to figure out, how the person in front of you moves and so forth. And so I've been on a journey, since college, essentially. Like I wanted to learn, I needed a degree, applied to PT schools, got into some of them, and didn't go that route. And so that's fine. But then I realized there's more to exercise than sets and reps and so forth. And so I went to a bunch of other classes. Like one of them was RTS with Tom Purvis, kind of like the physics of exercise. That opened my mind. I went to another certification that I went through for years, and then I was like, I'm not gonna do this anymore. Then I found the muscle system specialist program with Greg Mack, and I realized that there are people out there that think of exercise in a different perspective and how we can use it to apply and make quality changes in not just athletes but also people. There's a lot of people out there that are hurting, right? They have unwanted sensations, and so how can we help them go on their exercise process where they're not getting hurt? There are some people that you just need to we need to get after them. We got to train them, but you can also set up exercise where we can cut it loose and get after it, but it's not going to wreck them per se. And so, yeah, I've just been on that journey for a while, and I think my goal is to help athletes become their best coaches, understand how their body moves. But same thing with adults, and then also building a community where we can have other trainers here, whether you're a guy or a girl. Right now, we only have guys, to where they can make an impact on those surrounding them. So I just wanted to build a facility where we can, have civil discourse, where we can learn. We can go learn something, bring it back as a group, talk about it. How does that apply? Does it work? Are there holes in the system? And I would say recently, I've always been really into baseball, softball, because I played baseball, and rotation and all this type of stuff. I was doing hitting lessons out of college, and I put bands on kids and this type of stuff. And they'd be like, why are you doing that? And I'm like, well, we need to speed it up. We need to slow it down. And that was years ago. But now there's all this different stuff out there for rotational mechanics and how to help an athlete. And so I think I've been on that journey, mainly baseball, softball, but I work with so many other athletes in other sports, from soccer to football to we do what's called aquatic swimming, synchronized swimming. There's just a bunch of different athletes we work with, and we work with adults too, whether they're really hurt and they have something that nobody else can figure out, but we're kind of there to kind of work through our assessment process and help them. I would say my main passion essentially is to just help people with exercise. The exercise is the tool that I use um, to make an impact in somebody's life. So I would say that I'm a lifelong learner. I love to have conversations. And as I've gotten older, people want to know the answer, but I feel like my answer typically is that it depends. So um, that's a little about me. I got my wife. We've been married for a plethora of years, which is a huge blessing. I got two kids. One's 7, one's 5. And they're a huge blessing too. And I've learned a lot about myself as a coach and obviously as a man with raising them, and then obviously being married to my wife. So I think that those life experiences have helped me also too become the trainer or strength coach or whatever you want to call me. It's helped me through that process too. So I would say I'm pretty. I guess I'm me. So
Yeah.
that's kind of me. And yeah. So Manny, thanks for having me on. I've been looking forward to this. So this is great.
That's all good. I will also say, um, you're a great part of this podcast as well, because I know Coach Ron McKeefrey told
Mm,
me to make this podcast, but then as soon as he did, I had a session at your gym, and I was talking to you through, and he was like, "Yeah, let's go for it. Like, I'll come on. I'll do whatever you want." And
mm-hmm.
again, I am in a very fortunate position, um, to have known some great people and
Yeah.
people that have always sort of been in my corner. You are one of them, and I kind of want to give a shout out to your program as well, because I did your assessments, and the best way that I can describe it is you are setting people up for success.
Mm,
And again, I don't always agree with the strength and conditioning coach title, but I do agree with the performance specialist,
okay.
because that we're not, our jobs as a strength and conditioning coach should be to make performance better,
Hmm.
but the key is longevity in sport. Like,
Yeah.
that is our bottom line. Like, if we can't make them play for as long as they can, we've essentially failed. Because,
Yeah.
like, again, we can't prevent injuries, we can mitigate most of the things that happen,
For sure.
non-contact, but our goal is to make sure that they can play week to week, month to month, year to year, and just for as long as we can. So I
Right.
think one of the best things about your program is that you have a solid fundamental understanding of the architecture of muscles, how they behave, how to fatigue them, and then how can we build upon them.
Hmm.
Like, when I was there, you analyzed my hip, and my hip is the sole reason for my fucking shoulder injury. So for
Yeah, that
me,
was crazy.
I was like that, and like, I still do them to this day. I
Love
have
it.
obviously progressed them, but the
Yes.
one that still kills is the incline calf raises. I have no idea, but it just kills me every single time. So I kind of want to dive into your program, and like, how did you go from that thought process of like, okay, we're just working out set reps, to then actually there's a little bit more intricacy in here
Yeah.
than we originally thought.
Yeah, I think growing up, so this goes like way back. So I think growing up, I was always trying to figure things out and look at things. And I don't want to be cliche where like I've always been like tinkering with toys at time. That's not what I was doing. Um, I was more so trying to figure out the why behind things. And that's what's been weird with my son is he does that. And I see it in him and I'm like, whoa, this is crazy. So the cool thing is I can help him on his process
Mm.
and ask questions. But I've always been trying to figure out something or there's a deeper underlying thing to something or why are we teaching hitting that way or why am I supposed to throw that way or but I was also raised in a kind of a tough environment growing up, so I was always a rule follower because I never wanted to cause or shake the boat in the household. So like I didn't want to get in trouble, I didn't want to do this type of stuff. So like I almost had this internal battle with myself where I was like, I don't want to rock the boat, but I do have questions. And so as I went to my degree, I went to junior college first. I went to Kennesaw State and played baseball. And I get into my major, and I'm still thankful for the professors I had there, just because they sparked thought. They gave us the
Mm.
information to understand, glycolysis, and oh, this muscle does this, and this does this, and let's do the math behind biomechanics. And I'm like, oh my gosh, why do I need to do this? They gave us the base of these things and understanding how to calculate torque and all this. I'm like, wow, this is kind of cool. Like I'm getting down into the nitty gritty of this. And then I got to a point where I was like, well, how do I make that apply in a real time setting? And so then I went on that route. So I started training that type of stuff out of college. Um, and then through that process, I was just seeing weird stuff. I call it weird stuff. It's
Mm.
not weird. We all have our own little compensations or whatever it is. And I've always known, because we've heard it, like, oh, the body is connected. The body's connected. And you're like, well, yeah, duh. But then realizing what connects the system, the nervous system, the information flows of like receiving information, goes up to the dorsal horn, bam, reaction, so forth. So do I understand the nervous system enough to how we process information, whether it's just touch? And I think the one that we mainly probably use for strength and conditioning is touch,
Hmm.
and muscular interaction, stuff like that. But there's also sensory systems, and how they interact with how we essentially produce a motor output, and so forth. So I've always been on that journey, but then I went to other classes along the way that led me to people that I respect so much. One of them was Tom Purvis at RTS. The other one that I talk with a whole lot is Greg Mack from Exercise Professional Education. And I met them essentially through another course I went through, and Jacques is another one who does essentially training from a nervous system perspective. That rocked me, bro. That class rocked me. And so, and then another one is Matt Bernier talking to me about how muscles work. Like, what is, okay, if I take a skeleton, I put a muscle here, but somebody's hip comes to me and they're externally they're turned out. The abductor no longer becomes an abductor; it becomes a hip extensor, and then the adductor can potentially become a hip flexor just because of how the structure is sitting, right? So they introduced me in books of like structure dictates function and all type of stuff. And so as I went on this journey, the one person who really rattled me was Greg Mack, and it was like, I'm not crazy. I'm not crazy the way I'm thinking about things, but I thought it was crazy. But he would show me research about like, no, this is how the system works. No, this is what's going on, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, I'm not crazy. And then I've gone and been encouraged to research more. So my body view is essentially like I almost look at it, if I give an analogy, I look at it like the matrix. So like everybody's body,
Hmm.
like their own matrix code. I'm trying to figure out their code and how I can, correct the code if it's off, and make an impact. And if it's that one piece, it can affect their system in a good way. That's why I think yours was interesting, right? Hip, shoulder, this type of stuff. Like, who would make that connection? We could say that from a mechanical standpoint and be like, oh, well, same side, right? And so it's loading on one side or not. Or if it was opposite, like, oh, that's a fascial line. We can say this type of stuff. The hard part is we're trying to investigate the person in front of us
Hmm.
and how they're wired up. And so I appreciate that process of figuring out, okay, a weak link in somebody's system isn't always strength based. It could be a proprioception or an awareness of their system. Do they understand where their body is? This is a big one I've been on. Do you understand where your body is in time and space? Like we talk about body awareness, right? Or like whenever they do this movement, they speed up. It's like because they want to get out of that position fast. So then, with that being said, they're affecting time because they don't want to control their body in that three-dimensional continuum. Time adds the fourth dimension. So being able to think, okay, I understand the body is complex, and I acknowledge that, and I'm trying to help them with that. Um, and so I think that going to those courses helped me realize, one, I'm not nuts for thinking or crazy. I think that was the hard part I had to go get over of like, yeah, this is nuts. And like my perspective is if I have a young athlete, like we got to teach him how to play. We got to teach him how to do lunge. We got to teach him how to hinge. Like if we do just basic movements. But then as I feel, this is my perspective, I think as we get higher up in our skill set of playing sports, I feel like they need eyes on them more. I feel like they need eyes on them of like, oh my gosh, dude, this guy has to be on the like straight up right now. I'm like, oh, your wrist did this when you were hitting, and they're like, oh, and then it fixed everything, right? I'm like, oh, I feel so much better. I'm like, okay, great. Like, well, how'd you see that? Because I feel like we have to have keen eyes to
Hmm.
observe. I think a lot of times we're like, we want to exert our authority and say that we're show that we're smart, bro. The people wouldn't have come to you if you weren't smart or good at what you
Hmm.
do. And so I feel like we sometimes have to put on a show, but I just don't put on shows, you know. So yeah, but I think essentially my thought process was always kind of there, but then I had people like thankfully along the way that encouraged me to keep going and be like, yeah, think about that, then test it. And so
Hmm.
it's taking me on a journey to where I don't think that my body view is off, but also how we nobody talks about this, but how we view the world is how we treat the body. I mean, if we feel like we can talk about that from a psychological standpoint, if I feel like the world is out to get me,
Hmm.
I'm going to approach that as like my conversations. I'm out to get you. You're out to get me. I'm out to get you. You can never make a connection. So I don't think that we realize that our worldview as trainers or strength coaches impacts our body view, right? I mean, I have
Yep.
so many stories on surgeons that have gotten in trouble based off their worldview, but I won't go that route. So, but yeah.
No, we were kind of speaking about this at the start as well. It's like this industry has got very different principles, methods, and people will live and die by their hill, and
Yes.
it's kind of like, okay, cool, but like growth is on the other side of that hill. So like if you're just staying by that hill, again, I've mentioned this, like I've been very fortunate to be where I am, but this all came from people having open conversations with me.
Yes.
I can say a statement, people be like, okay, this is my take on it, and like I always think of like who the fuck am I to essentially tell them that they're wrong. Again, I've not had their mentorships, I've not had their
Right.
athletes, I've not had their program, I've not had their systems. They've come up with their processes because of that. I've came up with my processes because of my experience. So like our best approach to this is like, okay, this is what you do, this is what I do. Like how can we interlink? How can I see from your
Yeah.
point of view like what you're doing, what your program stands for, what kind of success you're having. And
I
it
agree.
goes back to what we were saying is like people love to let their egos seep into conversations with their athletes, their coaches. And like I've said this a lot of time and I will say it to people's faces, like strength and conditioning, coaching, the principles, they're the fundamentals. And again,
Yeah.
fundamentals are the fundamentals for a reason. Like the way you apply them is what adds value. I don't need to tell an athlete about the calcium pump because they don't give a fuck. I know what it does.
Yes.
I know
Yes.
what it does. I went through education, but I'm not going to extend my vocabulary. I'm not going to talk about ATPs or whatever phosphate system you want to talk about
Right.
because
Right.
I want to make myself look valuable. And you said it the best way. Like they already know you have value because they're there.
They're there.
So I'm going to keep my language simple so they can understand.
Yeah.
Again, the performance is for them, not me.
Correct.
So coaches who want to make themselves feel and look like they're the only option for their athletes is kind of like, okay, I get what you're meaning, but that's again, there's umpteen other coaches that will be able to do the
I know.
exact same thing.
I know. I mean, that's the thing, right? Is like I think the fitness industry in general has turned training into a commodity. The best way I had a mentor tell me is like, dude, we're not a banana, right? Because how do people shop? I'm gonna say here in the U.S., how do they shop? Oh well, that's a gym, and I could go there and pay. I go to the Whole Foods gym and pay $50 for a banana, or I can go to Albertsons or Safeway or Kroger and pay $2 for the banana, and it's a banana. It's not the same thing. So like we haven't. You have to find a way to actually provide value. Now the hard part is with that is that I had one mentor tell me one time that you need to think science but talk client.
Hmm.
And so every client that walks in the door has their own language and how they want to be communicated to. Now you can say introverted, extroverted, whatever it is, but also like how old are they? Um, what are the references they use? Like I can't be like, oh, this kid's loose like Gumby, and kids are like, who's Gumby? So I'm like, oh my gosh, I got to find a new character that's really loose online. So how do I figure out a way to communicate with that person in front of me, right? Because I'm not going to speak the same to everybody. There might be
Hmm.
commonalities in some aspect, but I can still have a group conversation with somebody. But there's walls that are put down in that scenario. So when you almost strive to understand what the person in front of you is saying, but if I have a one-on-one conversation, it's a deep conversation. I have to speak to that person directly and what resonates with them. I can't use analogies or parables or whatever it is that essentially don't make sense to them. They have to give me the information to know how they operate so I can communicate with them. So
Hmm.
I think it's crucial. I think more of us are similar than we realize, right? Like if you go to PRI, they're like, well, no, it's this. They're always stuck in this. And then you go to GOTA and they're talking about them. Like, you guys realize you're all kind of saying similar stuff, but you guys over here want to act like this and bash everybody. And then PRI is what? More of a PT perspective, but it's not PT, but it's PT. And then you've got that, there's all these different things. Like it just depends on the environment that you want to operate in. And if you want to
Hmm.
operate as I'm sophisticated, you might do a different certification. Or if I want to be like in somebody's face, you're gonna probably pick a certification or a camp that gets into people. You love that stuff, right? So I think we're all kind of seeing the same thing, but if we could dialogue and have a conversation and bring walls down, I think we could help more people.
Hmm.
So
I've
yeah.
very early on, I had Sitchin McDonald, who's also a private facility owner in Seattle, and he put it the best way. We can agree on 95% of a program, right? But there's also that 5% where you can either be egocentric and be like, "Nah, fuck you,
Mm-hmm.
That 5% is mine. Like I have 100%, you can have whatever's left. But
Right.
our way to discord and communicate and work through that 5% is what makes great coaches great coaches. Again, I was part of the football program. We
Mm,
shout a lot, but if I have a young kid coming into my program now, I'm not going to act the same way I did
right.
in that weight room than with them. So like it's also understanding people. And again, we talk a lot about cues on this
Mm,
podcast, and it's how you deliver them. I have this principle now where if an athlete isn't understanding my cues, that's not their fault.
no.
That's
No.
my fault. Like I'm not talking in a way that helps them understand what I want them to do. So
Right.
I'm not going to be like, I'm not going to get frustrated and be like, why can you not get this? It's a simple movement. You need to understand it. Like it's simple. Like I'm going to go through different cues, go through different techniques. Again, you talked about sensories and touch, and
Yeah.
like touch is a big powerful one because you can be like, I want you to move here. And they're like, oh, okay. Like that's where I'm moving from.
Right.
I need you to peel back from this way. I need you to rotate this way. And like twisting them or physically acting upon them. Or again, I love the cue ripping the carpet apart for knee valgus. I
Mm,
think everyone just understands that one. It's just click.
yeah. They can latch it onto that. They
Yeah.
have like, oh, I know what that is, and they latch it. Yeah, for sure.
Again, it comes from talking with people, but like people can only understand your message when you make it clear for the way that they're understanding and they take it. On that, we kind of go into some of the cultural aspects
Yeah.
of performance. Um, do you want to dive into a little bit of where you were coming from when we started talking about it,
Yeah.
and we can
Yeah.
sort of go from there?
For sure. I mean, I think so. It's back to communication, right? So the language that we're using, how we're communicating with the person in front of us. I'll keep this part kind of brief because we talked about it. We had an athlete come in. He's probably started about 2 months ago. I think the kid's a very like unique, outlierish type of mover. Um, I think he throws fuzz. His arm slots real nice, like all this type of stuff, right? But I was being taught to throw may not match his plane of how he wants to move or how he perceives his body to move in space and time, which is fine. Like that's totally fine. But um, he had a tournament. What was it last weekend? And he hadn't thrown live outside in like 5 to 6 months. Which in my mind, I'm thinking throwing indoors versus outdoors is much different. So I was like, "Hey, bro!" Like this week, "Hey, bro, how was the outing?" He was like, "Good." I'm like, "Whoa!" It normally comes in excited, ready to go. What's going on? Like, okay, that was good. I'm like, "Well, how'd it go?" He's like, "Well, I had 9 Ks in 3 innings," and I'm like, "It's pretty good." 9 strikeouts in 3 innings. So you essentially, you have 9 outs to get. You got 9 strikeouts, and then somebody else in here was like, "Well, did you walk some people?" Like, because they were like, there was a disconnect in his like. If I heard I threw 9 Ks as a pitcher in 3 innings, I'm like, I'm balling. So would you walk people? Like, yeah, walk people. I'm like, okay. And he was so focused on that, and he was like, I was like, well, have you thrown live? And he's like, we have thrown indoors. Well, that's different, right? But this kid, he almost, I think he feels an internal pressure of having to be perfect. I don't know if it's a, I think it's an unconscious confidence of like I have to be perfect versus a conscious awareness of like I didn't realize I'm operating that way. But his house, I mean, is Indian, which is fine. It's great. I love those people. They're amazing people. They're smart. They're intelligent. And I know this kid's smart, but the ceiling that he has to deal with, and you said it this way, might be up here so much that he's not allowed to like explore and get to that position. It's like, you need to be here right now. We're investing money. We're doing this. I'm not saying that their household's like that, but a cultural aspect of how you communicate to somebody and how they view themselves in the tasks that they're doing might impact them. And so I told him, I was like, dude, I think you're just focusing on the negative, right? And he's like, well, I've always had trouble with location. And I was like, well, if you keep thinking about that, like I have trouble with location, it's going to come true because you could strike out 3 guys, do 1 walk, and you won't even think about the 3 strikeouts. You'll think about the walk, and you'll be like, I can't locate, blah blah. You're making that come true, and so the hard part is helping the person in front of you, like what's their background. You could take culture. You could look at the parents and how the parents parent in the household. You can think about their coaches and how they're coaching them on their, whatever sport they play. There's all these things that impact and create the culture of the athlete in front of you. But the bigger thing for him was like just his culture in general, like what his ethnicity was and what is expected. Academics, you do this. Dude, the kid's like in college. Like this kid. When I say this kid's smart, he's so smart. Like some kid was in here was like I'm having trouble with calculus, blah, blah, blah. And he's like, what is it? And they're like, well, I'm having trouble with this. He's like, oh, it's just this, this, and this. Come over to the whiteboard. He just like off the cuff was like, and they're like, oh, that makes sense. I'm like, he's really good at that, but he thinks that movement and throwing is an Excel sheet of A plus B equals C. Dude, it's a
Mm.
biological system. It's not a mathematical model. And it was cool because I could reflect back on that with him too. And I'm like, dude, you're fine, but give yourself some grace. And I forgot what I had said. I was like, are you? So somebody else in here asked him, he's like, well, there's a difference between acknowledging that you're having trouble locating the ball and like obsessing
Fixating on.
over it. Yeah, yes, that's the word, fixation, and having a fixation on it. And so he was like it hit him, and he was like, so I'm like fixating on it. I'm like, yeah. He was like, that makes sense. So the other guy that came in, because the culture we built here is we can all partake in conversations. Because the cool thing was, is the guy that said it to him, he's the exact same way. So what did that tell me with this guy next to me? He acknowledged that he was a fixation person versus this. So when we're communicating to people, understanding so many things about them will help us to know how to communicate with them, and so
Mm.
forth. But that was kind of the gist of it. And I think it's more important than we even realize.
100%. And I kind of alluded to different cultures and their needs, and I'll touch back
Yeah.
on the ceilings aspect. And it's like, for me, I'm Portuguese. Like, I was born in Portugal. My mom and dad are Portuguese. My dad's very old school. So like, there's an element of work ethic that you have to have in a job to be deemed
Yeah.
successful. So for me, when although like I know how much work I've put into this industry, how much
Yeah.
I've done with it, because it's not that traditional like manual labor type industry. My parents don't really understand what I do, so the ceiling's here, but I'm kind of like operating here to them. But like, if we looked at work ethic and how much work I've put in, how much dedication I've put in, I am there,
Yeah.
but
Oh, yeah.
it's just in an unconventional way. So when they see me working and just being on a screen and playing and talking with other coaches, they're like, kind of like, yeah, cool, but like, how's that hard work?
Right. Right.
And again, it's not a diss on them. Like, they are
No,
extremely
no, no,
proud
no,
of
no, no.
everything I do, but it's just like different cultural, um like the culture of that person can seep into everything that they do.
For
Like,
sure.
I'm a very perfectionist type person because I've always seen my mom and dad work 2 3 different jobs. So for me, like, I need to work hard to make sure that everything that I do is worth it. But like,
Hmm.
that's on me. And it's it's understanding how those can play into the weight room, but then also into a team. Like, say
Yeah.
you've got, like, the US is a little bit different because you have all different types of cultures mingling in with one another.
Yes.
Like, you can have someone that's from a very academic, from a very working class altogether, and like, how do we navigate that as coaches? As like, okay, I know I need to speak to this person this way, but this person actually needs a little bit more of instructional. Like, I need to
Yeah.
explain the how and the why, where someone else, I can just tell them, hey, squat, and they'll squat.
Yes. Yeah, 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 for sure. And that's real. I mean, I think that the hard time, if I'm being general with this, I think a lot of coaches, what they'll do is they'll think, this is how I view the world. This is the culture that I come from. And I push that on the
Mm,
others that I work with. Right. So you said something earlier too, and I didn't talk about this, but you were like, not knowing a coach's experience and so forth. I think that one thing that we have to understand is depending on the clients that come in the door, that's going to shape the type of training that we do. So
mhm,
if I am working with only adults, my training is going to be shaped around that, right? So, and I gave an analogy with a hitter yesterday that if every pitch that you're getting is a data point and you're an AI algorithm or your AI is going to learn to that.
mhm,
So if I get a bunch of parents that I'm going to train and I want to train them athletic, I have to find parents potentially that were ex athletes that want to stay athletic. But if I'm getting adults that come in that like, I don't want my back to hurt when I'm training or living, or working or whatever it is, I might get this type of athlete or client in front of me that's going to shape my training. So the data that is coming to you or the clients that are coming to you will dictate the type of training that you do. Um, there's always a disconnect. I think a lot of trainers stop training when
mhm,
there's I want to train athletes and they train adults like athletes. And I'm being general with this. And they're like, well, I'm not doing what I want to do. these adults are getting hurt. I'm pushing them too much, like because you're just loading them too much, right? So they're like, well, I'm going to go do something else. I'm going to go sell real estate, or I'm going to go do something, whatever it is. So that's the hard part with it, is like you have to figure out what the person in front of you needs, or you can try to market and go to sporting events and whatever it is. So the hard part is if there's a disconnect in your training and what the client in front of you wants, you're going to end up being unhappy. They're going to end up being unhappy, and then you can't actually provide the value that you think that you can provide. But if you're like, okay, I'm an adult right now. I got parents that I train, dude. I'm not gonna train like an adult. They need to learn. Like I have this couple come in and they're married to train their daughter. The daughter's gonna be good at, like, she's legit. She's like 12 or 13, and the parents were just like, the dad was intrigued by our conversations about softball and development and this type of stuff, and the mom was just like sitting here because I was supposed to assess the mom first, and then he just asked a question. And we went for an hour, and I was like, well, just let you know, we need to reschedule this. We're not going to get through the assessment. The mom was sitting there. She was just like, oh my gosh. And then we got done with the conversation. She goes, is this like what you think about all the time? I go, yeah, but I'm going to have this mindset for what
Hmm.
you, which I know that you're together and you're going to come at the same time. You guys don't want the same goals. So why do I train you the same? She's like, oh my gosh. And so he's like, that's what I'm saying is, why are we coaching softball girls the same? And softball's behind, in my opinion, compared to baseball, you know, drills and this drill, and everybody should do good on this drill. I'm like, if we know that not everybody is the same, doesn't learn the same, let's just take learning. Nobody learns the same. So why are we training them the same? We know the principles
Hmm.
are there. How do I build strength? Cool. Let's do a dissertation on that. And then the stimulus or tools I use to produce that, I don't know if that matters as much anymore. Like there's certain lifts I like, but their body may not like it. They may not like it, or I need to elevate it off the ground, or limit the range to go on a squat with a bar on their back. But then we can do a goblet squat, which completes the full range of motion. Like I don't need one exercise to do the full range of motion. There's a full range of motion for that exercise, not for the tissues I'm trying to train. So yeah, I just think it's interesting that we change our training based off of the data points that we get, which would be the clients that we have. So, um, and that's why I think
I've got
social media is crazy.
hmm I've got a couple points on that, and this goes for the way you should look at internships as well. And that's how I
Okay.
looked at it. That's how Ryan looks at it. Um, and it's you need to be good at what's in front of you right now.
Yeah.
Like as an intern, you're going to clean a lot,
Yeah.
and to have
Yeah.
expectations on being like I'm going to program for the whole time is ludicrous. Like
Yeah. Yeah.
your first internship, you're a glorified cleaner. You will get to talk to some athletes, but you're a glorified cleaner. You're going to clean up chalk, clean the dumbbell pit. The racks need wiped down. Like, but I found, and this is the mentality that I went across there with, is I've got however long this internship is to make everyone know and remember who I am.
Correct.
That was my sole goal when I was across there. I showed up, I cleaned, I did whatever I want, but that led to more tasks.
Mm-hmm.
I would attack those tasks the exact same way. There was one point where I went from weight room, nutrition, uh, PT, water bottles. I did fucking everything,
Yeah.
restocking. But like that's the expectation that I put on myself, and you kind of have to attack your coach in the same way. Like
Yeah.
if I have someone coming in with shoulder pinching or injuries, I'm going to treat that. I'm not going to be like, oh yeah, we're doing 5x5 fucking
I love
shoulder
it.
presses. Like we're not going to do that. I'm not going
Yeah.
to do that. I'm going to assess first of all. And you said something earlier where our goal is to sort of, if we look at the human body as a puzzle, we need to find each piece and where they connect with each
Yeah.
other.
Oh yeah.
So going from someone walks in, oh, I've done something to my shoulder. Okay, cool. Like I had someone in last week who has a frozen shoulder. That's what she was
Okay.
told by the
Okay.
doctor. Um, but when we were assessing it, she actually had zero pain in her shoulder. It was just bicep and tricep. So I'm like,
Mm.
okay, there's something that you're being told by the doctor that's not actually matching up with a normal frozen shoulder signs and symptoms, right? So I'm like, okay, let me do some tests. Can you give me a big muscle? Show me your guns. She did it. Oh yeah, I'm getting pain here. Okay, can you reach overhead? She's like, I can get to here. By the end of the session, we were getting up here.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of like it's finding those puzzles, finding those really
Yes.
intricate ways of movement. And again, I owe this to you. I look at movement differently because of that time we spent together. It's like there isn't just a 0 to 100.
Mm,
There's We're going to throw letters in there. We're going to throw signs in there. Like the human body is so complex, and you can't go in the mind
dude.
of, okay, they're wanting to get strong, 5 by 5s, three by
Right.
fives, three
Right.
by threes. That's going to do no good.
It's true. I mean, it's hard. I think one thing that's helped my training too in general is looking for things that do not change in the system.
Hmm.
If I'm training somebody and this area is getting better and this is it or this is too, and there's this one area or this movement, however you want to think about it, that's just not getting better. I'm gonna dive into this. I mean, rotation is a perfect indication of that, right? Like we can say the outcome of hitting a ball or whatever it is, but if they're like, oh, I swing and I have back pain, like, whoa, what's going on here? What are all the pieces and the components of rotation that need to happen? Right? Like, okay, the pieces are pretty good. The structure looks pretty good. They're able to control these different muscle contractions, which would in turn help with rotation. But then how are they thinking about driving their car? Right? I mean, a Porsche is not meant to go off roading. So if you're telling a Porsche to go off roading, it may do it for a bit, but then it's going to break down. Right? So I think rotation is a huge key to that too, because it's like, if they're like, oh, well, an athlete, they're rotating all the time. So like we can't do any rotational stuff in the gym in season. Yeah, I don't know if that's true. You're swinging let's say baseball, a 30-ounce bat. You're swinging it, and all the way to the end, it's a little more or a little bit more torque on the system because it's not attached to the system. So I understand that, but could we have them slow down on a twist, and that's not the same velocity to rotate their tires? I mean, there's so many things that we can do with that, but I think the hard part is understanding that I had an athlete like, yeah, like I keep over rotating when I hit, my back hurts. Looked at their foot on their plant leg, and they couldn't control pronation. So they can't control pronation. They're going to land in supination. And then when I land in supination, aka like a calf raise, not like a huge calf raise, but like, just,
Hmm.
supination.
Just enough to
Full,
people
yeah,
tend to.
full foot. Yeah, then they go to swing. There's nothing resisting them going into supination. They're going to go into more supination, which means the spine is going to take the stress. So it's like we look at the big stuff where it's like, oh, we got to get you to, no stride or do this. And it's like, it literally was just their left foot or their
Yeah.
plant leg controlling that. And I was like, God, no pain. That feels better. My swing feels better. We talked nothing about their swing mechanics, how they should hold the bat, whatever it is. The body adapts to stresses, and we have to figure those things out. So
Hmm.
I think it's a complicated thing. And I feel like, in my perspective, every exercise, every movement I have them do to me, and I think the guys here too, it's an assessment.
Hmm.
Because if I have an athlete come in and they do a lunge, I'm like, dude, they're killing it. And one day they come in, I'm like, what was that? That's not their normal lunge. Something's off. Hey, how are you feeling? It prompts a question. Hey, how are you feeling? But the hard part is a lot of trainers are not paying attention enough
Hmm.
to see when something goes off in the system. So, Greg Mack from one of my mentors was like, "Do we need to become better field observationalists? We need to observe the people we're working with." But yeah, that's a whole other story.
We talk a lot about coaching eye on this channel, and
Mm,
it's something very unique that, again, I have ADHD and I'm dyslexic as shit. So there's obviously some mental stuff there, but I always look for the positive in it. I can in my head slow down time when I'm looking
hmm.
at movement, and it's that very specific skill that I am always looking for. Like when
Yes.
someone's doing a squat or something, I'm visually seeing every single movement. And again, going back to that architecture of the muscle, like I
Yeah.
know how it should be moving, how the nerves sort of
Yeah.
prompt
Yeah.
that movement.
Yeah.
Like how are we as coaches able to see what's going on further than, oh, this is a squat, oh, this is rotation. And again, I always go back to your videos on rotational work and breaking them down, how complex it is, how the spine can move.
Yeah.
And again, we both have spoke about him, but Vernon Griffith, like he's got
Yeah.
this amazing video on, okay, the spine, like we're taught that the spine should be stiff and
Yeah.
you should control it at all times. But then he imposed this question of, okay, but like, what about a quad amputee? He's got no limbs. Like his spine, that's all it's doing. It's moving. It's that way that he's getting about. He has to sort of maneuver his spine, twist and
Yeah.
turn to get movement. So then, are our spines meant to be stiff?
You got to think of it this way, right? So they're not meant to be stiff, right? So this was hard. Is like growing up, we would do monkey bars. we would do, we would be outside and do stuff. But I think what I'm seeing with the athletes now is they're not taking their body on excursions,
Mm,
right?
mhm.
So there's a documentary on Netflix, which this is kind of like way off, kind of weird, but and this probably gives you an idea of like what I watch and then the lens I'm looking through. But there's a documentary on Netflix called Babies,
Okay.
and we watched the first season, and it was essentially based on hormonal responses with children and how fathers can connect with their babies more. Because like once the child's born, there's like an automatic hormone response where like essentially the mother and the child connect. So I was intrigued by that. But then season two is all about like movement, and I was fascinated. And so essentially what they were saying in the second season is that every movement is built upon one another as they grow in age. So at a young age with my kids, I'm not telling them technical stuff. I'm like, hey,
Mhm,
swing this way. Hey, do this. Hey, let's climb on this. You want to go climb that? Sure. You want to go do something dangerous? I'll be right there. Like you're gonna climb this ladder and do this. Like go do it. So I think we're losing the capability of athletes being able to have those movement experiences built into their system. So with that being said, if we're telling a kid, let's just say this, good posture, stand up, good
mhm,
posture, we don't know how they're interpreting that, but we show them so they mimic that, right? Because like my son doesn't do what I tell him to do all the time, but he'll do what he sees me do.
mhm.
He'll do what he
Monkey
sees
sees,
me
monkey
do,
do.
right? So it's like, wait a second, if you're gonna do what you see me do, okay, let's dial this thing in. So how do I demonstrate to him? Like he sees me on the ground rolling around doing stuff. We're gonna jump on a beanbag, like there's certain things I can do based off the size of their little furniture. I'm a large human, so I
Mhm,
can't do everything they're doing. But I think that's a huge thing is I have athletes that do not have a prerequisite to even do certain things that they're being taught to do,
mhm,
but they're doing it in the skill of the sport that they're doing. And they're the parents like they're just not thriving. They're not thriving. Well, they don't have that file. So if I can look at their matrix code per se and upload, like what Neo do.
mhm,
Oh my gosh, I just learned how to do jujitsu. Like again. And then the next, how can I upload this movement software to
mhm,
where now that skill becomes easier? Wow, this kid is 6'6". If I was 6'6" and played basketball and I wore shoes that were basketball shoes, I would never want to go on the ground. If I'm 6'6", I would never want to learn how to interact with the ground. I'd be afraid to fall. That's way up there. So, Slush strength. Corey Schlesinger talks about like how he gets his guys to crawl years ago when he was at
mhm,
Stanford. And I think the thing is why he's been so successful too is he said we're glorified PE teachers. And I thought that perspective was so humbling because especially now we are losing athletic capabilities and athletes to come in
mhm.
the door because they're losing these prerequisites of playing outside doing things. So
Yeah.
understanding the intricacies of like, okay, how can I help them? Okay, if we learn how to use the ground, their spine's gonna move better. How do we teach them how to move the spine? Like, if I'm telling a kid in the weight room, a baseball player, to do a deadlift, which we should brace our spine. Don't get me wrong, we should brace. Like, dude,
Yeah.
the spine needs to
Bracing's
do.
key. Yeah.
Yeah, dude. I mean, the spine should do what the task at hand is demanding of it. The hard part is that we take that approach, and if they think about that approach when they're hitting, when they're throwing, guess what's going to be affected? The skill. Because we do everything in the weight room, and this is my theory. We do everything in the weight room in neutral.
Mhm,
And then we go to
mhm,
the skill sport and they're doing everything away from neutral. So how do we one teach them what their plumb line is of their spine and then take them on an excursion? And you could build this out in a beautiful progression. A deadlift, 2 feet on the ground. Then you can go kickstand or a B stance. Then you can potentially, if you want to get really crazy, load one side with like a 5% difference than the other, and then 10 and whatever it is, and learning that. You could use a mace and do deadlifts where all the weight's on one
mhm,
side and how they can negotiate their spine. So they're not getting a bunch of movement, but they're learning how to negotiate when the load is on one side versus the other. Then we can actually do spinal cars. Then we can do cable stuff to work. Like you can do that. I think starting there in the plumb line, will help, but then taking them on an excursion. But there's a disconnect. The weight
mhm,
room wants to keep everything neutral, but in sports, everything is away from neutral. And we wonder why athletes are getting non contact injuries because we're telling them to be strong in neutral. So, in time and space, if I'm strong from here, but I don't know how to get here and then return back, why would I expect non contact injuries to go down?
mhm,
Right. And now we got coaches that are like, well, we're having them jump side to side, this type of stuff. That's great. Do that. Mix it up. Stimulate the system and then have them go on excursion, come back. Like, what is homeostasis?
mhm,
Maintaining
mhm,
balance. But then can I go on an excursion and return back to here? If they don't know what this is and we're teaching them to go on these excursions, we're like Peter Pan, bro. We're Peter
mhm.
Pan. We're like, I'm lost, boy. I don't know what to do.
It's not even that. It's as well like when we do explore those movements, how can we find homeostasis in those movements? Like
Yes.
I always talk, and I'm giving credit to Rob Anderson here. Like he had this beautiful system of mitigation and injuries, and it's we should start isometric,
Mm,
go into coming out of isometric, like, and I've then further developed this, but the last step is still his, and it's like, okay, now how can I contract? Then how can I apply some plyometrics in there, and then how can I put it through ballistics? So if we're
yes.
talking about like rugby, for instance, right? I'm here. Our center is here. I'm going to make tackles that are overextension, and this is how
Okay.
I dislocated my shoulder. I went in for an overextended tackle. Someone ran into my shoulder, pops out. I'm injured. But if I had some control out there enough to still have and still elicit that powerful, quick movement,
Right.
but out there, that would have saved me from injury.
Yes.
So
But
we
yeah,
also need,
potentially,
yeah, yeah.
right? I think it would have been a better
I would have had
situation.
more control. There would
Yeah. Oh
be more
yeah.
mitigation in there.
Yes.
So
Hands down.
yeah, so it's kind of like that thing of, and again, I've only known a couple of this, and I say this with the most utmost respect. And there's mad science in what we do, and you're one of them where you explore movement further than what we originally think. Another one is Josh Chung, who is an
Mm-hmm.
amazing physiotherapist, and the way that he explores movement and explores different connections with it, it's kind of like your diary sessions on your Instagram, where you're exploring movement, you're exploring rotation, different spinal movements, different bodily movement that can lead to something better. And it's this thought process of like, okay, this is what we know to be true and normal. What's on the other side of that?
Right.
Like,
Right.
where can we go from there? Where can we explore to better equip this athlete for longevity?
Yeah, I think that's a crucial thing, right? I mean, if I looked at last year, I worked with a team, and I worked at UW softball last year. They had 17 girls on the team. They played probably 14 ish. So, like, dude, we could have no injuries. And I
Mm,
had to get them stronger, but more dynamic. So, my goal was to individualize all their programming. And if they understood what they were trying to do and so forth, dude, we had like no injuries. We had one girl step on a base kind of weird last year, but that was it. We had no like injuries. And so, I credit, the women, the team for partaking in a whole new way of how we were training. We were still deadlifting, we were still
mm,
squatting, but then they would do some skill acquisition stuff at the end, or hey, based off your assessment, you're going to do a pull down versus you're going to do a row. And then when you do a row, you're going to be at a 45-degree angle or whatever it is. How do we figure out essentially building it around them so their body can process? And then they start to realize that, oh my gosh, what I'm doing here, it's applying to my throw, it's applying to my hitting, and that learning curve speeds up. And then I'm communicating with the coaches. So I think if we can find a way to dial those things in and help them play for longer,
mm.
dude, I mean, generally speaking, dude, sports is not healthy.
No,
Like, let's be honest. I mean,
we're pushing the
it's not,
bodies to their extremes. Yep.
dude. It's not healthy, right? I mean, they made a whole new medical profession based off of
Mm,
sports injuries. Oh, you're a sports med doctor. Oh, we made a whole different profession because of the stresses of sports. And it's hard for us as strength coaches or trainers, or how do you say, performance specialists, to how do we help with the longevity to mitigate this stuff as best as possible. And I think for me, that's the fun part, man. I mean, and I think that if the athlete or even the adults that I train, if they have an awareness of what they're trying to do, they can prevent that stuff from happening, or they won't put their body in a situation where they'll get hurt. Like Mahomes, there's that big one on Mahomes where he like
hmm.
got
The
tackled and went
twisting. Yep.
backwards.
Yep.
Dude, Bobby trained him for that. They do that stuff. He has
Hmm.
awareness of how to organize that, and that's crazy. Like, oh, he did the play, but what amazed me is he didn't get hurt.
Hmm.
Like, what? So
I think
there's all
as
these.
well as like we with the mitigation, and it's a thing where even if it does happen and they get injured, we can bring them back a lot quicker than if they were not to do it,
Yes,
right? Because
yes, no, yep.
like the whole thing, and again, I hate prevention. Like you can't prevent anything
I
from
know.
happening. You
I
can't.
know.
I know we want to, but we can't. Like it's like mitigation at least gives you the wiggle room to be like, okay, we mitigated it, it still happened, but let's see you come back quicker.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
like the best way that I can describe mitigation is like we're building the systems around the injury to be able to deal with that injury.
I love it.
And
Spot on.
it's just again it takes conversations like again we talk about being married to certain exercises and dying on hills, but like I used to die on deadlifts, but now I
Feel
kind
you.
of look, I was like, yeah, but it depends. Like, do they need
Yeah,
it? And again, like I'm kind of working on this theory and how it can potentially apply. And again, I think you should experiment with yourself and your program
yeah,
as much as possible because that's how we grow as coaches. But this thing of VBT and cognitive performance, how can we marry the both? Because like not all athletes are going to need one RMs or two times their body
right,
weights or three
right,
times their body weights. Like not all athletes need it. Like I'm not going to get my long distance runners to squat three or four times their body weight. That does
right.
them no fucking good. But if I can get them to squat fast and if I can get them
Yes,
to then perform mental skills, like if we take American football, for instance, the quarterback doesn't need conditioning, but he does
he
because
does.
like
Yeah, yeah,
the amount of cognitive things that are happening. Okay, there's someone coming up on me on the left, so I need to look everywhere at the same time. I need to make the right decision and throw. I need to step back. I need to cut. I need to actually all my routes are bust. I need to run. I need to take off.
right,
Like
right.
this is all cognitively exhausting. So they need that
I mean,
conditioning. They need
yes,
that software update to be like, I can make this through the whole 3 hours that we're playing.
for sure. I mean, it's intense. I mean, I never even played football at a high level, but I feel like that'd be intense, especially decision making. I mean, I get why quarterback has to be so dialed, right? I mean, it's like holy cow. But I agree. I mean, there's times and places to do these things,
Hmm.
and I think that we can be hardline and be like, oh, baseball players, they run for 60 or sorry, they run for 90 feet, right? Cool, that's it. Why do we have them run long distance? I mean, I'm asking the question like, do you feel good running long distance? Yeah, it kind of wakes me up. Okay, cool. Then do that as your recovery.
Mm. The
You
active
know,
recovery is key too.
yeah, if they like that and it feels good to their system, fine. Now, physiologically speaking, it may not be the best thing for them to do on a regular basis if it's a power, they
Hmm.
pitch or whatever. But like, why can't we do both? Right? Because like, if you look at even just taking your body on an excursion, if we're only built for sprints, but then we have this capacity for long distance, why don't we just like mainly do sprints and then add a
Hmm.
long run in and then come back? Because they're going to lift in the weight room to make sure that power's still there. So if if I had an athlete like I like my recovery is distance running or steady state cardio, okay, fine, that's fine. So guess what we do in the weight room? Nothing slow,
Hmm.
nothing. I
Get as
need to
much, yeah.
I need to do a stimulus that's going to get him going. So again, that's working with the athlete in front of you. If I
We
tell him
talk
like
a
no more distance, no more distance, he's like, I love distance
Yep.
though. It just varies.
We talk a lot about capacity on this podcast, and it's again, we also need to realize that strength, power, speed, agility, hypertrophy, endurance, so like strength endurance, power endurance, like it's not one. They're all
Right.
intertwined. It's like
Yes.
energy systems. People think ATP, they think that creatine phosphate, they think aerobic, anaerobic, but it's like your body is not like, oh yeah, I'll switch one end. Oh wait, we're getting to that top end. Let's switch off. Let's turn another
Yeah,
one on.
yeah, yeah, dude.
It's
I know.
it's continuous. Like it doesn't. There's and again, I kind of attribute that to the textbooks and how we've been taught, and I get it.
Yeah, for sure.
We
Yes.
need a system, but we also need to think beyond that systems. Like that's like in no logical mind, your body doesn't like it's like breathing. We don't do breathing. It just does. Right? We're not going to be like, okay, I need to inhale, I need to exhale. So it's like it's a continuous thing, and the energy systems and strength, power, it's a continuous. To get more strength, you need more power. To get more
Yeah.
power, you need more hypertrophy. Like
Yes.
hypertrophy sort of expands, builds the muscle to then allow for bigger capacity of strength. So we explore
Yes.
strength. The strength will then lead on to developing more power. I have more room in my muscle to adapt for that power um,
Yes.
adaptation that I want.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah,
it's
man.
it's kind of thinking of the body this way too.
It's motor unit recruitment, right? Let's just take basic logic. the more motor units I have, I need to integrate them into the system. But if I don't have more motor units, I can't really get that twitch as much. I mean, it's like basic stuff. Like I might have an athlete. It's like, dude, you actually have enough motor units. I need you to learn how to like combine that better. But then I have an
Mm-hmm.
athlete that comes in that has literally none. And I'm being exact, not none. Has like we actually need some, dude. Like you know, you need to get some size on you. Not crazy size, but like we need to get you like a little more dense, legit
Mm-hmm.
muscle, and then we can wire those things up, right? And like people are like, dude, my son hasn't gained a bunch of weight, but he's like way more powerful. I'm like, well, one, he's moving better, but then two, he's wired up in a better manner. He has better muscle. It's not just like there, right? So
Mm-hmm.
there's so many routes we can go. It's just it's too complicated to give a simple answer, right? And I
Mm-hmm.
think once we have an appreciation of that the body is complex, we can make better decisions and also give each other grace, you
Mm-hmm.
know? Like it doesn't mean you keep or you stop instilling the good form and basics into your athletes, because then one day they might hit a growth spurt and all of a sudden everything that you built
Mm-hmm.
up to that point, it clicks and you're like, if we just stopped, or if the parents were like, well, it's not getting any better, and like just please don't stop, like keep going on your
Mm-hmm.
journey, you know, like, but if you stop, you're gonna miss this window so that when they grow or they actually like hit puberty at a certain point, you know, we didn't even talk about hormones, dude. We didn't even talk
Mm-hmm.
about that. That's a whole other. Anyways,
Yep.
I'm gonna stop there.
Yeah. I am also aware of your time, and I really do appreciate you for coming on.
Yeah,
Um,
dude. Thank you for
this is
having me.
also an open invite to come back on, and we can
Yeah.
maybe on a day that we're both like we have a couple hours spare,
Yes.
we can
Well,
dive
yeah. Let
into
me
it
know. Like,
properly.
yeah, this spring I'll have a lot more free time. So if you're like, hey, can we get 2-3 hours, dude? Yeah, I'll block it out. We'll just chop it up. You know.
Love it. But if you let everyone know where they can find you and sort of ask some questions and further
Yeah. Yeah, if
engage
they got
with you.
questions, I mean, you can go to the website. I need to update it. We need new photos of our fellas here. But yeah, Instagram's a great place to go. So I'm probably on there the most. I do have Twitter. I'm not on there a whole bunch, but I'd say Instagram's probably the best um, to interact. If you direct message me, I'll probably get back to you. If I don't respond right away, it means it's in a hidden message, so I have to go look for that. But Instagram's probably the best. If you comment, I'll see it. I'll comment back. If you direct message, that's fine. Um, but yeah, I mean, that's where you can find me. The business is Curtis Clay Training. The guys here are amazing. We're just a team of people trying to make an impact on those that come through the door. Twitter, I think it's like there's no vowels, but it's like Curtis Clay Train. And the website's curtisclaytraining.com. And you can send an email inquiry on there, but we use that as like funneling people
Hmm.
coming in. But Instagram's probably the best way to reach me. If you ever have a question, reach out. If you have a question about a post I did or I'm confused, like please comment,
Hmm.
because how am I going to know unless you comment? So, and then it can start a really cool dialogue. So, but yeah,
100%.
however,
I really do appreciate you. I've got my sort of dog trying to bite me right now. See?
hey, yeah,
No, I really do appreciate you for coming on, and thank you again for all the work that you do as well.
yeah, man, appreciate having me on, man. We'll do this again.
100%.
All
Peace.
right, brother. Peace.